Hey folks, this is a quick video on the 11th house in response to a subscriber who asked me about my 11th house stellium. So I was explaining in a previous video that I have 5 planets in the 11th house. So she was curious about my take on the 11th house and also having such a strong 11th house emphasis. I got really excited about this request and I wanted to just do it right away. So I'm going to talk about it from my personal experience and also what I've seen through my client practice. So the 11th house, really for me, the substance of it has to do with what I would describe as group and collective association. Yeah. The 11th house has been kind of a bit wishy-washy in terms of descriptions, this business of hopes and wishes. I have not found that to be particularly striking for me in terms of my observations, this business of hopes and wishes. I find that the 11th house has a lot to do with this business of collective association, a group consciousness. So people with an 11th house emphasis, in whatever way it means or it translates for them, they have an affinity with some kind of collective in terms of collective thought, in terms of collective systems of thought, in my experience. So they have a consciousness of the collective picture, and they also have a good consciousness of future trends and a kind of futuristic sense of whatever collective they are associated with. So the 11th house is an air house that has to do with thought. But in my experience, the 11th house and, having a strong emphasis there means that the person is attuned with, let's say, thought patterns that concern the group, whatever group they are affiliated with or identify with. People with 11th house emphasis, they kind of are attuned to big systems of thought, and they're able to sort of perceive collective thought patterns. There is this perception of and thinking about the group, and there is a consciousness of, well, how do I and my personal skill sets fit into a broader social, metaphysical, political context. So with Sun in the 11th house, there is this sort of giving thought to how does my personal creativity, that's the Sun, fit into a wider collective group consciousness or group context. The need to make the personal self relevant in the context of something broader, a broader system of thought or metaphysical system of thought. For me, it's meant that I have found that I am very attuned to, let's say, collective planetary dynamics and energies, and that's astrology is definitely sort of a nice outpicturing of that. Me doing astrology, but definitely beyond the astrology, very keen to perceive what's happening with us on a global level. So even the astrology that I do is sort of definitely marrying up how it is that our personal charts fit into a broader context of human consciousness. And I think that it definitely has to do with that emphasis in my 11th house. I've seen that people with a strong 11th house emphasis, with a few planets in the 11th house, they need to sort of marshal groups of people, and they need to work with them, but also often to lead them, to sort of be on the cutting edge, whereby they kind of marshal people in a more, let's say, progressive direction. So they like to organize and be involved in a collective context, but often they are acting in positions of leadership, intellectual leadership as well. So they are kind of on the cutting edge, and that is in line with the fact that they are more futuristic and able to kind of see in a more futuristic way where things are going. That has been my experience of that. There is an interesting way in which people with the 11th house strong in their chart, they are different, or let's say nonconformist, and they sort of in their own way, there is a defiance of the status quo, particularly in terms of their intellectual positions. They're kind of going against the grain in terms of how they think and how progressive they might be in terms of all of that. So a few planets, I have Venus in the 11th house. I've seen that this often corresponds to the need to associate with larger groups of people. It's almost like that's the platform that someone with an 11th house Venus will kind of take, that they need to associate with people on a kind of big scale, associate with larger groups of people. Saturn in the 11th house, there is this kind of responsibility to the collective, whatever that collective might be, a responsibility to kind of teach what you know to a broader group of people, and a group of people who can benefit from your wisdom, that Saturn, your experience, that Saturn. There is a duty and responsibility to teach what you know and to impart what you know in a kind of collective context. So it also can mean, in terms of Saturn, that there is a way in which the person might feel sort of very different, even though there is a need to participate in the collective and within a group. There is also a way in which perhaps that person might define themselves very differently from everybody else. So there's this kind of, I'm inside but I'm outside. There is this business of being the outsider when Saturn is there, or that can be one sort of reflection of that placement. What else do I have here to tell you guys? The moon. I also have the moon in the 11th house, that there is this attunement that I have seen in my own life there is with the moon this attunement on an energy level to collective dynamics of energy. So there is an emotional or energy attunement to what is happening on the collective level, if that makes sense. You know, insofar as hopes and dreams and ideals go, for me, what I've seen in terms of having a strong 11th house, that the dreams and hopes and wishes have to do with the collective, personal hopes for collective or group advancement, personal hopes for the evolution of human consciousness, for example. So with the moon in the 11th house, there's a way in which the person, that in my experience, is sort of tuned into the soul of the collective, and being able, as I said, to perceive group dynamics and things that affect the collective. So someone with an 11th house emphasis may, let's say, really care about humanity and the state of humanity in an immediate way, and they may care about humanity and humankind in a way that's, let's say, more immediate than other people. It has a more personal significance to them. The collective context has a more personal significance to someone with an 11th house emphasis. So strong 11th house, people who are here to lead and marshal people in more progressive directions. Persons with a strong 11th house may be a kind of way shower to groups of people, but often very much ahead of them in their thought, whether political, scientific, spiritual thought. So that has been sort of the threads that I have observed in my own life, and also in the lives of people, friends, clients. So, 11th house, I think the substance of it is, well, the person always sees themselves. They have a strong sense of themselves as belonging, or that's not what I want to say. They have a strong sense of their role in relation to some kind of collective or group. They see themselves as an individual, but they're very conscious of and aware of what that means in relation to a broader context, whether that is a kind of spiritual context, intellectual context, social context, political context. They are aware of themselves as individuals in relation to some broader scheme. So I think that people with a strong 11th house, they need to find a way of contributing their personal creativity and purpose in a wide context, a context that means something to them, and a context that invariably involves kind of broader groups of people. So that person needs to integrate and match up their purpose with something that is meaningful in a collective way, something that is meaningful in a broad social context, something that is meaningful to where a group is going, a collective is going, and what their needs might be on a whole. So it's this marriage of my personal creativity, especially when the sun is there, and also, you know, what are the needs of this group or collective with whom I share some kind of affinity, or with whom I am concerned with on an intellectual kind of level. So that's it from me, folks. That's my riff on the 11th house. Really a lovely request from a subscriber. Happy to kind of just offer up some thoughts on the 11th house and having a strong 11th house emphasis. Thank you so much for watching. Check out all the other astro content on the channel and subscribe for more discussions or riffs like this. Talk soon. Bye.